balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Episode number 150. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, which stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant, and I help moms with breastfeeding. You can just go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz and find out more information. I am so glad that we get to spend some more time together. Today, we're going to be talking about milk supply again. For the literally hundreds of new subscribers to the show that I'm getting every week, I want to extend a very, very warm welcome to the show and invite you to join our Facebook group where we discuss lots of issues related to breastfeeding. All you need to do is go to Facebook and search for these 4 words, All About Breastfeeding Community. Just click on the join button and introduce yourself. April 1st, 2017 is my new launch date for the All About Mothering membership site. This is the go-to place that will take you on a self-paced course outline where you will learn in-depth information on topics such as conception, first, second, and third trimester, birth, breastfeeding, and postpartum. You will learn lots of things that you just don't get from the textbooks. When you get a chance, check out allaboutmothering.com, and there you can sign up for a free ebook titled Breastfeeding Getting Started. And once there and signed in, you can win prizes on the launch date, which is April 1st, 2017. And lastly, I wanted to send a personal congratulations to Erin on the birth of her baby girl. Last week, we talked about the moms who thought they could not make enough milk for their babies. We talked about the moms who are making enough and just don't know it. And then we talked about the moms who easily have the potential to make enough milk, but needed some practical advice to help build a good supply. One of the things we mentioned was feeding frequency. Today, we will focus on the many reasons moms should pay attention to and respond to their baby's hunger cues and avoid scheduling their baby's feeding times. We're going to focus on the first few days to the first 3 months. At the end of the show, I will reveal the one really bad breastfeeding habit that I did that made me struggle to make enough milk for my first baby. I think the biggest misconception when it comes to babies feeding and sleeping cycles is that it is our job as parents to get our babies on a schedule. In theory, this sounds like it would really work out nice and in the best interest of babies and parents. If your baby ate and slept on a schedule that you designed, this would fit nicely into your day, and you would have a routine that you could count on. In theory, seems good. However, when adults attempt to have this degree of control over a new baby, it typically is a hard thing to make happen. And if you're breastfeeding your baby, this forced routine can cause lots of breastfeeding difficulty. There are some very real common sense and practical reasons why this is just not a safe way to go about feeding your baby. For starters, we want you to have the best opportunity to build up a good supply, one that meets your baby's needs. All the studies up to this date have shown that the way to build a good supply is to understand normal newborn breastfeeding behavior, normal frequency of feeds, and normal weight gain. It is helpful to understand how the breast makes milk. I have done a whole show on this, and you can go back to episode number 110 for that information. Your baby was born with a stomach that's the size of a small marble. Now just get a picture of a small marble in your head. This makes it impossible for them to have large feedings and keep large volumes down without spitting up. Your milk is also available in small amounts initially, and it gradually builds over time. I don't think it's an accident that babies' bellies are small and that the volume of milk is about 1/4 of an ounce per feeding on the first day, and gradually working up to about an ounce or so in 5 days. This means that it's normal for a baby to want to feed frequently. Because their bellies can only hold so much at one time. This also fits nicely into the way we know that your body makes milk. Initially, small amounts, and gradually, as the days go on and the feedings increase, your milk supply also increases, particularly in the early days of breastfeeding. In a nutshell, what we know to be true is that the more frequent your breasts are stimulated, the more frequent the milk is removed efficiently, the more likely you are to build up a supply that meets your baby's needs. Frequent breastfeeding in the early first few days will typically lead to your milk volume increasing quicker. Frequent breastfeeds increases a mother's prolactin levels, and high prolactin levels are needed to establish a good supply for your baby. As a new mother, I realized that professionals seemed to assume that I knew what I was doing. As much as I hated to admit it, there was so much that I didn't know. Perhaps with others, it's instinctive. However, for me, some things just were not. When people would say, "Trust your intuition," "Feed your baby whenever she's hungry," I thought I knew the signs, and yet I realized that I could have used these pointers that I'm going to share with you. I find that it's helpful to learn about the early, active, and late signs of hunger for a newborn. So the early signs of hunger for a newborn, they start kind of like smacking or licking their lips, opening and closing their mouth, sucking on their lips, tongue, hands, fingers, toes, toys, or clothing. Now, the one thing I wanted to say about this is how the average baby goes about it. They kind of slowly gear up to it. But we do have those babies that I say go from 0 to 10. There is no quietly lip smacking and looking around and starting to put their fingers in their mouth. Their eyes pop open and they're at a high-pitched cry right away. So some babies get there right away. But then again, if they do, it's very apparent to you. I'm talking right now about the early signs. So the early signs, like I said, are smacking and licking their lips and opening and closing their mouth. And it's not in a frenzied fashion. They're just kind of looking around and doing this stuff. The active phase, the active sign, is they start rooting around on the chest of whoever's carrying them. They're trying to position for nursing either by lying back or they're kind of tugging away, they're touching, they're getting fidgety, they're squirming around a lot. If you're holding them, they start to kind of move their hands and arms with a lot more frenzy. Sometimes you feel like they're hitting you. And they begin really fussing and sometimes breathing really fast. If you could get to your baby before this time, that's optimal. If you miss that early window of time and you can get to their baby when they're in the active phase, like I just said, where they're fidgeting, they're starting to root around like crazy, bopping up and down, sucking on anything that's right next to them, that would be optimal. However, if you don't get to your baby at a certain point, then the late sign of hungers is they are moving their head frantically from side to side, opening and closing their mouth, and they are crying, and sometimes very loudly. And if you're a mom of a newborn, I'm sure you've seen this. Some babies are on one end of the spectrum, that's 0 to 10. Most babies fall somewhere in between. And there are some babies that are, like I say, my Jesse, my son, he was just very mellow yellow. And he would wait. He would just kind of calmly tell me that he was ready by very calm and slow and gentle movements. And he would be like that for quite a while. Very, very different than my two daughters, who let it be known, like probably within seconds. They were closer to the 0 to 10 babies, and they did not give me a chance. So while it's not always possible, it's nice if you're able to bring your baby to the breast during the early signs of hunger. While it is not always possible, it is nice if you're able to bring your baby to the breast during the early signs of hunger. And the reason being is that sometimes babies get so worked up that it takes a lot to calm them down before they're willing to close their mouth when they latch on, stop crying, and begin to suck. The reason I say that it's not always possible is because as much as we can outline the signs for you, like I said, there are some babies that I call 0 to 10. And you know what? You just do your best, because with them, there is no leisurely, quietly, and ever so gradually showing you the signs. They just seem to wake up screaming with little to no time to respond. And then after a while, you just know that that's the baby that you have. Sometimes it's not possible because, maybe you're in the other room and you didn't see them. Maybe you actually decided to finally take a shower and they seem to be very settled when you did so. But now you turn off the water and you're in the bathroom and you hear your otherwise sleeping baby just screaming loudly. Please do not feel bad. Sometimes it just is what it is. You get busy doing something else and you cannot be hovering over your baby all the time. And moms who have several children, I know you know what I mean. Let's start with the first few days of your baby's life. The colostrum, which is the milk produced during the first few days of postpartum, it's lower in fat and calories than is more mature milk. It is also produced in smaller amounts. A higher frequency newborn feeding schedule makes babies compensate for the lower caloric density of their milk. You can also go back to the episode marked colostrum. I forget the number at this point, but I'll put it in the show notes. I did a whole episode on colostrum. Some other really cool information to pass on to you about feedings and frequency. Have you heard other mothers say that their babies were diagnosed with jaundice? Jaundice is a common condition in newborns, and it refers to the yellow coloring of the skin and the whites of the eyes that happens when there's too much bilirubin in the blood. Bilirubin is produced by the normal breakdown of red blood cells. We spell bilirubin Bilirubin. Normally, it passes through the liver, which releases it into the intestines as bile, which is a liquid that helps with digestion. So jaundice happens when bilirubin builds up faster than a newborn's liver can break it down and pass it from the body. To be clear, I'm talking about basic jaundice in the newborn. Typically, the excess red blood cells bind with the stool, and that is how the body rids itself of the excess red blood cells. We want your baby to be feeding frequently enough to take in plenty of colostrum, because we know that colostrum has a laxative effect. The milk binds with the bilirubin, which is excreted through the stools. I know some people feel it's good enough for a baby to keep up with the recommended P's per day. However, we know that about 2% of bilirubin is excreted through urine and 98% is excreted through the stools. So when I talk to parents and they tell me that their 5-day-old baby has not stooled in 2 days, I am really worried. I'm thinking, what is happening to their bilirubin levels? And I'm also thinking this may very well be a sign that they're not getting enough food. So you see, what's really cool about all this is the body has its own wisdom. Your milk has exactly what your baby needs for literally hundreds of reasons. One of the many reasons that makes colostrum so incredibly special is its laxative properties. we need for your baby to get enough colostrum to help eliminate excess red blood cells and avoid jaundice from going from beyond normal newborn jaundice to something you need to worry about and something that needs perhaps separation from your baby if the levels get too high. Sure, the Billy Lights and Billy Blankets can help the body rid of excess Billy levels, but why not prevent this from happening in the first place? Water will help your baby urinate more, but not get rid of the red blood cells. So no water or sugar water for your newborn. Formula can be very binding and constipating for babies, and when this happens, there's less stooling and the bilirubin levels rise. Frequent early feedings means plenty of colostrum for your baby, which means the more pooping going on, which means the quicker your volume of milk increases, which in turn means less than normal weight loss for your baby, and everyone is happy because your baby hasn't lost too much weight, your baby is peeing, your baby is pooping, and everybody is happy. Okay, once we get you through the very first few days, feeding frequency continues to be very important to the health of your baby, your milk supply, and your baby's weight gain. We know that the first 6 weeks of lactation are super important in that the more you stimulate your breasts, the easier it is for them to increase the supply. The later on in lactation you get, it's not that you can't build your supply. However, as the weeks go on, it can become more of a struggle for moms to build their supply. So it stands to reason that you want to maximize those first 6 weeks and provide frequent and efficient breast stimulation, which is not really hard to do, as your baby will more than likely be letting you know that he or she needs to be fed very frequently. To give you an idea of the gradual increase in supply, you begin with 1/4 ounce of colostrum on the first day of life. By 7 days, new mothers are making about 1.5 to 2 ounces of milk. As the feeding continues and you build your supply, you're typically making about 2.5 to 3 ounces by the time your baby is 3 weeks old. On average, mothers seem to make about 3.5 to 4.5 ounces per feeding for their babies. This is not an exact science. These are not exact numbers. However, learning what is average helps you to understand that the volume of milk gradually increases from 1/4 ounce the day your baby is born to about 4 ounces per feeding when your baby is 1 month old. We know this happens only by frequent and efficient milk removal, which is exactly why you don't want to limit your baby's feedings. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but if the milk doesn't come out frequently enough or removed efficiently enough, then you are at a great risk for not making enough milk for your baby. But what if, though, you've decided to schedule your baby's feedings, which may mean that you only feed your baby every 3 hours, let's say. Perhaps you take that a step further and you decide you're only going to feed your baby on one side for 20 minutes, or only feed on both sides for just 10 minutes on each side. Rather than your baby coming to your breast whenever they're hungry and staying feeding until they're really full, you are basically limiting their feeding times, limiting their intake, limiting their ability to have a full belly, and limiting their ability to stay fully hydrated. You see, your baby is dependent upon you to ensure they stay well fed and well hydrated. Limiting the amount of times they come to the breast and how long they get to stay drinking will also, unfortunately, limit the amount of milk you make. This is just a fact. By limiting the times that they come to the breast or the amount of time they're able to stay there, really what you're doing is you are telling your breast how much milk to make, rather than letting your baby tell your body how much milk to make. Now, let's say you're past the first 2 months and things have been going well. You've had a great supply, Your baby's gaining well, in fact, thriving, meeting all developmental milestones that we're tracking, and is a very happy cutie pie overall. But you are one tired, exhausted mommy, and you're getting frustrated with the lack of routine and not having any schedule you can count on. While things have been cruising along really nicely up to this point, you begin to think that others know what's best for you and your baby because the advice they're giving you sounds reasonable. You're hearing people say things like, if you don't put your baby on a schedule, you will never have a life. If you don't put your baby on a schedule, they will always be poor sleepers. If you don't put your baby on a schedule, you will never get a good night's sleep. If you keep feeding your baby every time they cry, you're going to spoil them. Also, when you hear people say, if you don't let your baby fall asleep on their own, they will always cry for you to hold them, and they will never learn how to self-soothe. Now, I can see that as a new parent, never having gone down this road before, it seems quite reasonable that what people are telling you is true. But every mother and baby is different. Because you're tired and are concerned that some of this might be true, and because you're just questioning your own judgment and knowledge base as a new mother, you decide to give it a try, and you decide to put your baby on a schedule. The thing is that in order to do this, you have to be willing to ignore your baby's cries. There's a difference between a few minutes of your baby whimpering and a baby crying. There's a difference between 5 minutes or less of crying because, your sleeping baby woke up and you were in the shower and you got out, and to the best of your ability, you got to your baby as quickly as you can. There's a difference between that happening and allowing your baby to cry for 10 minutes to a half hour to an hour of hearing your baby screaming because you're ignoring their pleas for food. It just does not seem right to ignore a baby's screams for 5 or more minutes when they're crying to be held, rocked, or fed, or hydrated. Remember, babies, they're just little human beings who are dependent on the adults in their life to ensure their well-being. They are in distress and trying their best to let you know. Can you imagine what it must feel like if you were incredibly thirsty? Your mouth so dry, so parched, that it starts to hurt to swallow. Can you imagine the nauseousness and headaches you might get if you had to wait too long to have a meal? You would be pretty darn grumpy, stuck in a small space that you couldn't leave, just waiting for someone to come along and give you a sip of water. And what if, when they came, they only gave you just enough to begin to quench your thirst, but not enough to fully hydrate, and certainly not enough to have a full belly? You finally had some food and drink, but not enough, and that person goes away, but you're still here in the same spot, feeling quite grumpy. This is what I wanted to talk about next. The emotional side of this issue. I believe it is a matter of respecting our babies. Our babies, well, they're just little people. And when they're crying out for food and drink, we need to hear them and respond to their needs. It truly does not stay this way forever. Babies eventually do begin to stretch out their sleep time, and they do begin to go longer in between feedings. It just may not fit into a timeline that you want to see happen. I know that some of you are not happy with what I'm saying. I know you're tired. I know that you need to get more sleep. You may be finding it hard to function during the day. I will address this in the next week's show because I know this cannot be ignored. But for today's show, I'm focusing on just feeding frequency. To wrap up what we learned today, your baby's health. Babies' bellies are small and they need to eat frequently because they can only accept small amounts at a time. Babies are prone to get jaundice that needs medical care if they are not stooling frequently enough to get rid of the excess bilirubin. This is one of the very important reasons why they need to feed frequently, particularly in the early days of life. Babies need to be back to birth weight at 2 weeks old and continue to gain appropriately after that. This is why we need to feed them whenever they're hungry, whatever the clock or whatever another person might say. Babies need to be well hydrated and well fed to gain and grow and develop normally. They're also responsible for keeping up a well-established supply. They need to feed frequently in order to tell you to do so. How about their emotional health? Babies need to be picked up and paid attention to and fed when hungry. Please do not abuse your baby by withholding food when they need it or denying the ability to be held and comforted when they need it. Your supply is very dependent upon your breast stimulation, and the first 6 weeks are really important to building a good supply. Please do not limit your body's capability of making enough milk for your baby by scheduling them. Sticking to a schedule can prevent you from making enough milk for your baby. Successful breastfeeding, milk supply, and a well-fed baby is very dependent on approaching every mother and baby pair as their own individual unit, having nothing to do with anyone else's breastfeeding habits. Waiting for the clock to say it's time to eat is very dangerous to successful breastfeeding. Making babies wait to eat can be very stressful to mom, the baby, and the whole household who has to listen to a baby cry from hunger. Feeding your baby according to their hunger cues, this helps to build a healthy supply. Feeding your baby according to their hunger cues helps the baby regulate their feeding volume, otherwise a tendency for them to overeat is created. Feeding is one important aspect of care for your baby. Caring for your baby and responding to their needs helps mothers be in tune with their baby's needs and helps to build a level of trust in their relationship. The information I shared with you on today's show are not based on my personal opinions. There is much science to back up this information, and this is exactly why all the major health organizations, including the WHO, World Health Organization, and the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, advise parents to feed their newborns whenever they show signs of hunger cues, and why the WHO states that regimented newborn feeding schedules are harmful and effective. Okay, so I hope that I've been able to explain that to you in a way that you understand. Okay, so this leads me to my bad habit that I had when breastfeeding. I am right-handed, and since no one explained anything different to me, anytime my baby Alicia was hungry, I would scoop her up, hold her in my right forearm, and automatically offer her the left breast. It seemed that she would get pretty full on that side alone, and while each feeding I did offer her the right breast, she treated this side more like dessert, which meant that she fed there for considerably less time, which meant that the right breast got significantly less stimulation, which in turn I realized much later that this is the reason the right side made so much less milk than the left breast. I had no idea until one day I was in a La Leche League meeting and I heard one of the leaders say to a mom, "You might want to start each feeding on the side your baby left off last feeding or the one that they didn't take the last feeding." She made the dessert analogy and light bulbs went off for me. So glad I had attended that meeting. We get so much information as a breastfeeding mother. Perhaps I heard that or read that or, I just have no idea. But I don't remember where I heard that. But it never hurts to hear early instructions over and over and over again. So my bad habit was picking her up, and I was boosting the supply on the left-hand side, and the right-hand side was lagging behind. You will find links to more information on this in the show notes. If you find this information valuable, please pass it on to anyone you feel who can benefit from learning about this topic. I'm going to post this in the Facebook page. The fact that I did this show and what it was about, I'll do just kind of paraphrase. And I'm going to invite you to post any bad habits that you have or that you used to have. They can be funny or sad or ones that interfered with breastfeeding. Let's laugh and let's learn with each other. Until the next show, bye-bye. Have you heard that Phoenix, Arizona is blessed with an amazing birthing center? Baby Moon Inn Birth Center is the best option for families who want access to midwifery care in and out of a hospital setting. You can experience birth in a comfortable home-like setting where natural birth is the focus. Laboring in water, being able to walk outside during labor, and enjoy the beautiful garden. This is what birth can be like for you. There is so much more to learn about Baby Moon. The staff would love to have the opportunity to meet you and would like to extend an invitation for you to attend a free Choices in Childbirth class and a tour of the birth center. All you need to do is call 602-314-7755. That's 602-314-7755 and ask for the tour dates. You can also go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast, and on the right-hand side of the page, you will see a link that will bring you to the calendar, and you can sign up for the tour yourself. When you come in for the tour, make sure that you tell them you found out about it from the All About Breastfeeding podcast, and you will be given a very lovely free gift.